can make, and we can't even duplicate it. And they come up with all these ideas how it could have been done, but they can't duplicate it. So if they can't even figure out how the Romans made cement, let alone how these blocks got moved, that's my idea here.
That's true. The very large stones, the weight of like a locomotive engines weigh about 70 tons, were moved, to great heights, also with no handling scars. So there's more to it than what Egyptologists say.
Huh. Now, is there any chance aliens could have been involved or anything like that to help, transport the stones?
People do consider that about aliens being associated with the Great Pyramid because it's a starkly modern, ultra-modern structure without any ornamentation or anything like that, but it was built in distant antiquity, so it's almost an out-of-place artifact when you consider its precision, the precision workmanship, the stone cutting precision, and all of that. So then people think, possibly there were aliens. But I think that it was just some smart people. Just a smart person. Like Nikola Tesla figured out alternating current pretty much in one day. And so I think that they were probably a group of smart people that figured out how to build these structures, and they did all of that for a huge return on investment.
Well, what do you think the actual purpose of the pyramid was for? I mean, you hear all these people. A lot of people say, it's to, keep the Earth's magnetic field. Other people to say is to keep comets at one time from hitting Earth, but it's broken now. Everything from, everything. I mean, what do you think the purpose, in your feeling after reading all these books, what are the pyramids there for?
There are a lot of purposes proposed for the Great Pyramid, an alien beacon, if you will, type of thing, or an observatory for somehow, and a whole host of other, a power plant. Another author calls it the Giza power plant. So there's a whole host of purposes that are proposed, including, of course, a tomb, a very ineffective tomb, with sliding stones and long open passages. Ask an Egyptologist, how do sliding stones and long open passages protect the pharaoh's mummy? And you won't get a coherent answer. But what I think that the Great Pyramid was infrastructure for the civilization that built it, and that the infrastructure provided a return on investment, if you will. And what that return on investment was, it provided prosperity for the civilization that built it. And I think that the Great Pyramid was a single-purpose functioning machine that pumped water.
Okay, now, pump water, can you explain how it could pump water? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. So you're saying that it was some way to take water, then pump it, through the community, or?
Well, we think that water was made available at the Giza Plateau and at the base of the Giza Plateau. Other researchers, including Christopher Dunn, contend that water was delivered to the Giza Plateau up to the base of the Great Pyramid, and then he also contends that water entered the descending passage from the upper end of the descending passage. So he and I are very similar on that idea. But water went down the descending passage into the subterranean chamber, which is about 100 feet below the base of the Great Pyramid, and that subterranean chamber acted similar to, but quite different, a hydraulic ram water pump. And the movement of the water inside that chamber caused water to go up through the grotto, up through the solid bedrock, up through the grotto, and then up to the lower end of the Grand Gallery. And we think, as do other researchers, that electrolysis occurred inside the Great Pyramid. We think hydrogen and oxygen was separated from water inside the Grand Gallery, and that mixture of gases is combustible, and that those gases in that water and airtight chamber, the Grand Gallery, was ignited, and that ultimately caused a vacuum, which drew water up the Grand Gallery, and then through the action of some valves, that water was allowed to move back down like a huge water piston, and ultimately compress the water and air, compress the air in the Queen's chamber, and ultimately water went through from the Queen's chamber to the King's chamber, and then out the King's chamber vents. So the output was the King's chamber vents. But it's hard to visualize. But we have a documentary on DVD called The Great Pyramid Water Pump, and it has a lot of computer-generated animations showing how the valves operated and the flow of water. So that will help people visualize how the Great Pyramid pumped water.
Okay, now I'm going to say you are breaking up every so often. I don't know if it's your location in your house or what have you, but now also, is there like wear marks inside the pyramid from the water flow? I mean, grooves cut into the walls and stuff to back that up?
Like erosion is your question.
Yeah, right.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. The most obvious is the ceiling in the grotto is quite eroded, and I described that, how that eroded in my book. The grotto is in the bedrock of below the Great Pyramid, but above the subterranean chamber, and it has a lot of erosion. And other people, researchers that think that there's a relationship between water and the Great Pyramid, also believe that there was erosion. We think that there was erosion in the subterranean chamber. Sir Flanders Petrie, an early Egyptologist, described the interior of the Great Pyramid having Nile earth inside of it, which would be like sediment from water. Even Herodotus described the Great Pyramid as being like an island surrounded by water.
Okay, now, but the thing is, then, if they were using it as a pump, or what you're describing, is why would it have been sealed?
Why would it what now? I didn't hear.
Why would the pyramid have been sealed? If from the standpoint that, if it's being used as what you're saying, I mean, the pyramid, was sealed to keep people from getting in and vandalizing it. I mean, wouldn't they have had it where they could have, like, maintenanced it or anything like that if something went wrong?
There was no operators or workers inside the Great Pyramid. It operated automatically. So that wasn't a problem for it being sealed. So it was fully automatic. Just like a refrigerator compressor is a sealed unit, but that's okay because people are not inside of it operating it.
Well, I was saying if something broke down where it ceased to function, how would they've gotten back into it to, make repairs?
Good question. What we think that some repairs could have been made by people going up through the grotto up to the lower end of the Grand Gallery, but it was important that the Great Pyramid water pump was sealed, and it was built watertight. The Grand Gallery is the stones are cemented together with a strong bonding agent. So being sealed is evidence that we think supports the idea that it was used as a water pumping system.
Interesting. Now, have they ever been able to figure out what type of sealant they used? I mean, like the Romans, with their type of cement they used. How about on the pyramids? Have they ever analyzed what compounds were in it or anything like that to make it withstand all the pressures and all the years it's still standing?
Yeah, there's certainly been some analysis of varying degrees of expertise, but the consensus is mixed as to what the bonding agent was made out of. Its characteristic is well known. It's stronger than the stones themselves. It's known. One of the early writers called the bonding agent tenacious.
Interesting.
But the Edgar brothers in their book wrote that and called it tenacious. But it's a very strong bonding agent, known for being extremely strong. But its exact composition is unknown. It's kind of a lost technology of the Great Pyramid.
Well, I think the whole pyramid is a lost technology because there's been people who tried duplicating, building a, scaled down pyramid. And yeah, they halfway did it, but they kind of gave up towards the end because they couldn't complete, the design of it the way it originally was done. And that's what I find so interesting. Again, you mentioned that they were maybe transported on barges. How was that possible? And how big a barge would it, for stones weighing that amount? That would have had to been some big size barge.
Yes, we think that barges held the stones of the Great Pyramid, many of them. And the quarries for the largest stones are 400 miles away from the Great Pyramid. And all researchers acknowledge that those 70-ton stones were put on barges and moved at least close to the building site. But a barge to lift a 70-ton stone has a draft of about 4 feet. So if you have a canal that's 4.5 feet deep, that's deep enough to hold a barge that can carry a 70-ton payload. The Erie Canal, when originally built in the 1830s, was 4.5 feet deep, and the barges carried 70-ton payloads.
Oh, wow. Now, did they have to make the canals going from a water source down to where they were building the pyramid?
Certainly. We think that the original builders, who were geniuses, provided water at the base of the Great Pyramid. And from there, we think that there were a series of canals or water locks between the building site and the catch basin in the Nile that was near the building site, if you will. And that was a series or flight of water locks from the level of the Nile up to the building site. So with the water, they were able to move stones on barges effortlessly up to the building site.
Interesting. Well, how would they unload them all off the barge, though? That's the other question I have for you. I mean, we're talking a huge amount of weight, on a barge. How would they even be able to lift it off the barge?
We contend that they had very specialized barges that accomplished a lot of the manipulation of the heavy stones. For example, you have a stone on a barge, but you want to take it off the barge. You move this. The barges are pretty narrow but long, and then the stones overhang on both sides. So if you could move the barge between two stone supports, like in a pond, and then allow water to enter the barge, it would slowly lower the huge stone onto those two supports. And then you lower the barge enough that it's off of the stone is off the barge, and then you can move that barge off out of the way, and then you have moved a stone off of a barge within minutes.
Interesting. Very interesting. Again, though,